How big a disaster does something need to be before you think, okay, we should do something different? Because whatever that point is, Rings of Power apparently hasn't met it yet, despite the fact that only 37% of viewers finished the show. Or my personal favourite title, The Rings of Power was a massive flop that most viewers gave up on. The actors have suddenly popped up doing brand new interviews. They just keep doubling down on all the mistakes they made in the past, talking about how destroying canon was so important to the show, and even so important to Tolkien. With Sophia Nomvete talking about how her appearing in the show was a moment for history. Because, you know, Tolkien was such a great writer, but he could never have actually reached his true potential as when I have come and acted in his TV show. And it's not as if Rings of Power exist in a vacuum. It's actually the first domino that happens. And when you've actually established that, no, we can take this lore and just destroy it, everybody else starts to join in as well. With even Lord of the Rings Online coming in and going, well, I guess we don't have to stick to the lore either. Which is how you end up with this mess, because when you include everything, all you've actually done is removed any kind of standard. And that's a problem, because lore is a standard, and the only way you can actually feel immersed in a fantasy world is if that world actually has rules and values of its own, and they have to be stuck to. Those rules were created by Tolkien, and now being destroyed by everybody. Is it just coincidence that Rings of Power came along and went, look, it doesn't matter if you destroy the lore, and then just a few months later, a game that was released in 2007 decided, actually, we can do the same? Or is there perhaps more to it? That when one thing is allowed to stand, it's the first domino that makes everybody else realize, well, if they can do it, so can I. I can get away with that as well. And isn't it strange that they all use the same tactics? Let's dig in. Now we start with Morfydd Clark, who's at least taking a more chilled out way of talking to the customers than she did before. You know, back when she was telling them to shut the up, she's now saying if I was on the other side, I'd also be feeling like that, or at least that's one way of reading it. Because in the interview with Vanity Fair, she goes on to talk about how people just have such a fixed vision of her in their minds. Because of that, you can't actually please everybody. But I do respect the ownership of her. And it's like, none of that is true. Yes, people have a fixed idea in their minds because that is the one that was written down. And there is only one version of her. But it's not that they feel ownership of her, as you describe. No, because that would be Tolkien's privilege because he's the author of it. She even goes as far as to say, I feel quite protective of her to make sure she's safe from harm. And it's not people feeling protective of an individual. It is protective of the law. It comes from a position that you don't have the right to change this, and you're going, well, as long as she's not harmed, it's fine. Even when asked about what do you think of feedback that you got about the show, she talks about how I've read the books, and so sometimes I've been like, well, I don't think a house would have looked like that. It is a greater issue than that house doesn't look like the house in the books than it is these aren't the same people, nobody looks as they should, you've got teleportation around the world, the story's crap, and these people didn't physically do any of the things that you're talking about. But no, people are definitely concerned that a house may have the wrong sort of tile on it. Because yes, Morfydd Clark did join Amazon's strategy before Rings of Power of, let's just try and shut everybody up, because it seemed to work for Wheel of Time. We managed to drown out those voices, something they didn't manage for Rings of Power, but they certainly tried. They did the Star Wars tactic of just coming out and calling everyone a bigot. No doubt some will be going, oh, well, this only applies to people that were doing it. No, she sent it publicly to everybody. If you have a problem with a small number of specific people, send the message to them. If you send it to everybody, you're tarring them all with the same brush. You're essentially going, I think you could be doing this, and so I need you to stop before you do it, because I won't stand for it. Before she did obviously double down on that message as well, because obviously it was going to be received with such good intention. It was great marketing PR indeed. And great marketing is a strength of the Rings of Power's actors. Whenever they come out with an interview, I always feel like I've learned a lot. Like when they're talking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the interviewer says it's like you got to read the end of the book first, to which she says, well, actually, I do the opposite of that. Yes, Morfydd Clark does not read the end of the book first, just like everybody else. I actually don't know who does this. Although it gets even stranger when she says, I don't finish books when I know they're not going to end how I want them to. To which I have no idea how you know how a book is going to end before you actually read it in the first place. But here we go. Because if there's one thing that has to be in every Rings of Power interview, it is obviously the social messaging, which we have here. What was the hardest learning curve for the role? To which she says, learning to play someone immortal. We are living in a time where we are reckoning with our past. We're learning from our past, and we're learning about the consequences of mistakes that happened before we were born. Morfydd Clark, in real life, suffers under the weight of guilt of things that happened from the past before she was born. I'm not responsible for something my neighbor does, let alone something that happened hundreds of years ago. But obviously, Morvett's plot could only be one weird, twisted ideology where she's like, I'm just being crushed under the weight of my ancestors and colonialism, because those are the only things I can even imagine that she's talking about. Either she's taken on some sort of Californian culture, which is weird if she's in Wales, or she's talking about the British Empire, for which apparently she is individually responsible for some reason. But no, the hardest thing that she had to learn for the role was that as an elf, she's like living history. So it's not just the weight and guilt of her past, but she was actually there. I'm like, yes, that's a very important difference. You are talking about your apparent personal feelings, where you're responsible for something that you couldn't possibly have influenced, but Galadriel, well, she was actually there. So yes, Galadriel could actually suffer with actions that she's done in the past or been involved with or linked to in the past. You though, Morfid, Welsh girl, not really. It really seems like you're struggling to find something to feel guilty over. Now, she did also say that she really enjoyed the language of Tolkien, how the elves speaking was really fun because they had a kind of rhythm to the way they spoke. There was something quite classical about it that felt almost Shakespearean. Because yes, whenever I think about Rings of Power and the elves speaking, I always think, that's on the level of Shakespeare.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward, but the ship has a secret. For unlike the stone, a gaze is not downward but up.
Seriously, dude, what have you been smoking? I tell you what, in decades to come, literature students will definitely be analysing over the complexities of that scene. Although she did struggle with the physicality of the entire set. In her career, she's been attacked, maimed, and wounded and killed. She's extremely good at screaming and being terrified, which didn't work for Galadriel. It's good to know they hired an actress whose entire body of work had nothing to do with the role, but apparently she worked with some amazing people, and they managed to coax her into actually doing the work and becoming confident enough to do it on the set. Like having therapy so she wouldn't suffer PTSD from people having a fake fight near her. I think we can all agree on that scared little kitten on the side of the road. But how does it feel now she's on the second season? Well, obviously, they needed to take so much care into protecting the material. I mean, we only went out and changed all of it, so, you know, I think that protection's going on really well. But at first, she was scared about how it was going to be received, but then she thought, well, what happens if you don't like it? All I'm doing is making a TV show, and so then I just relinquished caring about it, and it was good. Yeah, you know, at first I did worry that people wouldn't like it, and then I realised, it's only a TV show, it's just a job, mate, and I no longer care whether it's crap. You know, I'm just making a TV show. If everybody hates it, what's the problem? I don't know, it just doesn't seem to me like that's a positive growth in attitude. I actually think you should care if people like your show or not. I think you should care if your show was a massive flop that most viewers gave up on. I think you should care about why only 37% of people actually finished the show. Now, I agree, as an actress, there isn't actually much you can do to fix that, but also, as an actress, your attitude probably reflects that of the people who are making the show as well. Because if your directors and the scriptwriters are all coming down and going, no, the most important thing about this is to respect Tolkien, that's what we need to do. So don't go attacking any of the fans, you lunatic. I kind of think that that attitude and intention would get passed on down the crew. That if the top people are caring about the really minute details of the lore, then everybody else would as well. It should be drilled into you to care about the tiniest of little details with the show, and instead, well, you know, once I stopped caring whether everyone liked the show or not, everything got much better. Oh, it's only got 3 viewers, but I got paid, I'm sure it'll be fine. Then they talk about where the character's gonna go in the second season, which obviously she can't say much about, but she does talk about the first one where my grief was so intense, her sadness was so huge, and when you hit that ultimate low, you do end up becoming self-obsessed. You know, we've all been there. You get a little bit sad one day, next thing you're dating one of the most evil people to have ever lived. You become a little bit self-obsessed, and the next thing, you're falling for a bad boy who's trying to take over the world. Oh, let's be honest, that's just the standard teen romance nowadays, I guess. But she leaves it on a message which is definitely shared across the entire cast. That what she loves about Tolkien is that you need to be connected to the world and those around you. And you want to know who's never more connected to the world and those around them? None other than Sophia Nomvete, who says her actually appearing in the show is a moment of history, and a moment for so many people that will, she hopes, stand the test of time. Because Tolkien may have just written the world, and other people may have made movies which were absolutely huge successes and will be remembered for decades. But have you considered that she actually played a dwarf? And because she personally was in this, that is actually an achievement that dwarfs anything that came before. Look, I know you created the universe, but have you considered now I'm in it? and that will obviously go down in history. Who knows, when Morfid was talking about people becoming self-obsessed, maybe she just meant her own cast members, because these comments come from a Deadline panel, for which unfortunately the video won't be out until tomorrow. But we do get some quotes from Deezer, who doesn't seem to have learned anything from the marketing disaster of the first season. She talks about how the first season was an introductory phase, which was exactly its problem. Nothing happened. The issue was you had 8 hours of episodes introducing your characters, but your characters weren't deep enough to have 8 hours of content done about them. Much like the earlier quotes, the characters were designed to give the false perception of depth, while actually being incredibly shallow and meaningless.
The stone sees only downward, but the ship has a secret.
Now, there was a typo in this article which originally said it was Saruman that was arriving in Season 2, but at least they fixed that now. And she says that Sauron arriving is mind-blowing. How are people affected by it? Because Deezer is apparently currently being described as a joyful Lady M. And I'm like, sorry, did those people watch the show? Sure, she may have started as sort of happy and joyful, but she very quickly turned into a Sith Lord, which is like, I want power, we're gonna take over all the mines.
He's grown too old, his mind too feeble. One day this will be your kingdom.
Say it again, Wormtongue, say it again.
And together we will rule this mountain and all others before our time is done. That Mithril belongs to us.
We certainly didn't need Sauron in the picture to turn Deezer evil, but the problem comes when actors start to get really self-obsessed. I'm so important, I will change this piece of work, this art. And it definitely seems like she was set up by Deadline deliberately by leading into this issue. She spoke about playing the first doc, explaining that she didn't feel too much pressure, but this was her warrior moment. Have you never considered what it's like to go forward and destroy a classic piece of literature? That's what warriors would do. For her, it was a moment of history. A moment for so many people. People around the world have just been waiting for Sophia to step forward and lead them from the darkness. Before, I never thought I could achieve anything in life, but then somebody played a dwarf in a TV show and it changed the world. She thinks her appearing in the show was so important to the show, and even important to Tolkien. She's now saying she knows what he would have wanted, and yes, he did write the world exactly and very specifically as he wanted it to be, but don't you know, she's just come along and improved it so much that he definitely would have gone, actually, no, Sophia, if you'd been around in my day when I was writing this, I definitely would have put you into it, because I can't stand before your glory, because she is just the mere host of this incredible creation, so honored and proud to fly the flag for this moment. She's a force to be reckoned with and a dwarf at heart. Yes, she is. Because she's a dwarf. What else would she be at heart? Don't you know how important it is for the world of fantasy? This isn't just Tolkien's work now. No, her appearing in Rings of Power isn't just important to Rings of Power or The Lord of the Rings or even Tolkien. Now, it's the entire world of fantasy. Do you not see how I have changed the world with my breath? It's important for fantasy and for the world of the walking Tolkien. What? I did skim read this, and I'm not sure this actually makes sense. It's important for the world of fantasy and for the world of the walking Tolkien. Where do you think Tolkien's walking to, mate? Look, I don't care how much somebody likes Tolkien's work. If he suddenly starts walking around, I think we've got some kind of problem. But no, her appearing in Rings of Power was so important because she was the first dwarven princess. And not only to be that, but she is a mother and a woman, which is kind of important to be a princess in the first place. And I have to say, this is like one of the most egotistical, self-obsessed rants I think you could do. A lot of people think they're doing far more for the world than they actually are. Like you had an Eternals actor coming out and saying that their movie was saving lives. But even that didn't come out and say they were making a moment of history that was improving one of the most well-known works of literature in the world, and not just important for an entire people, but actually changing the entire world of fantasy and improving Tolkien just by her own simple existence in the world. Some people think the sun shines out of their backside, and other people apparently just think they're the very sun itself. You know, if I didn't appear, this would just be a frozen ball of ice. Because you know the one thing that Lord of the Rings has never had? Yeah, a mother. Especially one of those mothers who's also a woman. What an original idea. Everyone must have just popped up out of the ground or something. Now, she does go on to talk about the Dwarven Kingdom, and everything about the show was based on the idea that they're of stone and flame. And when I read that, I was really hoping, please don't think that them being the creation of stone and flame refers to the Balrog. But I do have a feeling that that's what she's referring to. I just can't say for sure. And then we go on to her singing for part of it, which I have to say, as someone that did detailed reviews of every episode, I just kind of skipped that bit. It didn't seem that important. But apparently, though, just like her existence in the show, despite the fact she was barely in it, this scene was actually far more important than I could ever have gathered, even after hearing about it, because it was so special that she could use her craft, her voice on set, to be able to improvise and craft something amazing. And then somebody else came in and extended his magic all over it, and it came from a really authentic, special, creative, and quite spiritual place. This is what it means to be in fantasy, the next generation, actually taking Tolkien, rewriting it, and vastly improving it for the modern age. It wasn't simply a destruction of what came before, no, this was a spiritual moment. So spiritual, in fact, that it managed to drive away all of its viewers. Something that maybe the original actors are finally catching on to. Talking about Warner Brothers announcing various other movies, he says he's fascinated and excited, and says that, well, obviously money is a part of it. It's not actually where the original movies came from. It came out of a passion for the books and wanting to see them realized. And he hopes that that's what will drive these new movies forwards, and that any screenwriter and filmmaker will come for a reverence for Tolkien's material and an enthusiasm to explore it. But just notice the different tone, a reverence for it, to explore it, to come and show it, not to change it, alter it, update it for a modern audience or bring it forward into a modern time, not to think that somehow this entire piece of work, which millions of people have enjoyed, is actually all about you. No, he wants it to come out of passion for the books and wanting to see them realized. Wanting to see words on the page actually just be reflected on screen, not rewritten for it. And that's why when he comes forward and goes, well, obviously money comes into it, I'm like, yeah, I actually think that's very important, because if you come forwards and do put the books on the screen, they'll make money like Lord of the Rings does. Whereas if you come forward and destroy them, if your ego takes over and suddenly you think you're the most important thing about it, that was the wrong paragraph. If you don't see recreating Tolkien as the moment of history, but instead you being the one which is in that role, then it doesn't really matter whether you want to make money or not, because you're just going to lose it. You're trying to use somebody else's IP as a crutch to support your own idea that you know wouldn't be able to survive on its own. Because if it could, you would have made it that way. And that's how, over time, things degenerate and change. Just like Lord of the Rings Online. Now, I've never played this game myself, but I've heard about it for years, and people used to love this game. It was always pitched to me by them as being true to the source material, as being authentic. And, well, that's all changing now, as we're testing new customization options, which basically allow you to do whatever you want. Where before, you could use this game to immerse yourself into the world. Now you're going to have to walk around where people who look like this now look like this. Yeah, it doesn't exactly look like Tolkien's world to me, would definitely harm the immersion, and yet apparently the developers, they don't care. You even had people going, okay, beards on female characters, that would make sense for dwarves, but can we just leave it at the dwarves? No is the answer to that. No, they're not. We've got to break the rules of the universe, the rules of the law, and just include everything, even things that don't belong. And it's okay then, why stop at that? Why not just put a Ferrari in for people to drive around? You want to take your obsession with a real world and put it where it doesn't belong, in a fantasy world, because you can't understand why people would want to immerse themselves in a different place. You know, people who finish work and just want to enter a different world. And you're like, no, I actually think this world should look just like our world. Because why would Lord of the Rings Online actually care about what Tolkien wrote in his lore? That just seems insane, doesn't it? In fact, anyone who's even speaking out against this is also getting banned on the forum, as they are nuking anyone from the culture war trolling of the main thread. For that, I think we can pretty much read, anyone who doesn't like it is just getting written down as a troll, and because we've now labelled you, we can safely get rid of you over there. We'll censor anyone who disagrees just to give the perception that everybody agrees. And there was even one guy who said, we will not be permitting discussion about this issue, whether here or elsewhere. If anyone engages in such a discussion, you will be removed from the program. So it didn't even matter if you weren't talking about it on that very forum. If they found out you were doing it anywhere on the internet, on Discord or Reddit or Twitter, if we find out it's you, you're banned. We're not just going to censor you here. We're going to make sure that you can't tell other people about it. Because not only do we love destroying canon and Lord of the Rings, despite the fact that that's the only reason we exist in the first place, but we're also going to make sure via threats that nobody on the outside finds out about this. Because if you dare say anything, you'll be banned. And you wouldn't want that, would you? And isn't that interesting, all of the different tactics that have been used in order to attack Lord of the Rings and canon in general? You had Morfydd Clark living in a time where she was absolutely consumed with guilt about what had happened in the past, and That's why she thinks she should change. You had Deezer coming out and saying how this is a moment of history, how this is important to so many people. It's a great moment for them. You wouldn't want to take that away from them. This is important to the show, important to Tolkien, even important to the world of fantasy as a whole. You wouldn't want to come out as a bigot, would you? And then Lord of the Rings Online, they didn't use guilt or shame. No, they went for fear. Guilt, shame, and fear. Such wonderful ways to contribute to a work of literature, don't you think? And definitely the ones on the side of good over there. And I can't help wondering why Lord of the Rings Online decided to do it now. This is a game that's been out since 2007, and yet now, 16 years later, actually no, I think we need to entirely change all of this and make it look like the real world instead of Tolkien's world. It's almost like Rings of Power gave them permission. It was the first one to drop, the first domino. Rings of Power came out and said, we can change the law, we think it needs to be changed, and then other properties of Tolkien went, actually no, I agree. This does need to be changed. There is a problem here. We have to do this to improve the future. And it is just the broken windows theory in action, where visible signs of something going wrong encourages more people to do the same. It's the idea that if you have a perfect building, everyone leaves it alone. But when one window gets broken, suddenly people start to do it to all the rest. If you've got a clean wall, it's fine. Put one piece of graffiti on it, and now the entire wall is covered in it. As long as there was an attitude that law is fixed, that a property should be defended and left alone, then everybody did. But the moment Rings of Power came along and thought, actually, we can improve it, then everybody else felt the license to go, well, if they can get away with it, then so can I. I should do it too, because I also think that there are problems with this all along. I think I should destroy it as well and smash another window. That's why it's important to speak out against this stuff. That's why things like the trailer being so absolutely massively downvoted was important. That's why they kept deleting the comments, because what mattered was the perception of it all. If they got away with it, then they could just keep on doing it, and everyone would be like, well, it's already happened before. When the first window gets smashed, if there's sufficient uproar, then it protects the rest. But if one person gets away with it, everybody else starts joining in as well, and before you know it, everybody's given up because the IP is already gone. It's something we've seen happen before, time and time again, and it's happening to Lord of the Rings right now. As more properties join in, when they see that Rings of Power, they think they got away with it. Although they probably think that because Amazon is desperately trying to hide the impact which what they're doing is having on their own bottom line. Just like they did on the very trailer itself, which had 16 million views and only 25,000 comments apparently. That's why when people say, just don't give it attention, ignore it, it'll all go away, it's wrong. It's not people viewing this trailer, downvoting it, or leaving comments about it that was the problem. They were trying to delete the comments to make it look like nobody cared. Because if everybody leaves it, one window gets smashed, and it means we can smash the rest in peace, and everyone's already given up because they think they've already lost. But they haven't, as long as all of the rules of an economy stay intact, where you have to make money, so you need viewers, or people to play your game. And the fact that you think you can come out and start banning people because they are disagreeing with you about something, not just on your own forum, but if they disagree anywhere on the internet, then you're going to censor and ban them, is quite frankly disgusting behavior. And you're doing it simply to give the impression, the perception, that everybody agrees with you, despite the fact that you know that you're the ones in the wrong. Because if more people agreed with you than disagreed with you, then it would show in the comments. You'd be able to have people go, I don't think this is right, and other people would disagree with them and prove why. Sunlight would be the best disinfectant, but instead you had to hide in darkness because you couldn't allow anyone to know what you were doing. So in a world where other Tolkien properties are following Rings of Power's lead, we've got some of the actors feeling guilty because they existed after some ancestors did something once, apparently, and others thinking that the entire IP would have been nothing if they hadn't acted in a minor role of a spin-off TV show. I'm not one that thinks ignoring something helps. I think it just emboldens them to do even more. And in fact, every time they smash a window, you go, no, that's wrong, that's immoral, and you shouldn't be doing it. That's not how we behave around here, because we have standards. And the standard for Tolkien and Lord of the Rings will be the law he wrote for himself, and nothing else. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.